Hey, this is Alyssa Kafinoha, and I am so excited to bring you a special bonus episode of the Durham Artist Archive. So we are technically outside of season 2, but I am so grateful to have had the opportunity to interview the most iconic Jaki Shelton Green, the first and the only North Carolina Poet Laureate, okay? If you know, you know, and if you don't, you're about to find out very shortly. She is an amazing poet, and she's in her mid to early 70s, so we really had a great intergenerational conversation around freedom, Black autonomy, community care, and towards the end of the conversation, we got to engage with the audience as well. So thank you again to NorthStar Church of the Arts for setting up this opportunity. It was an honor to connect with Jaki Shelton Green, and I hope you all learned something from this conversation. This is one of those where you definitely want to have a notebook, all right? A notebook in your pen. Enjoy. Thank you so much for having us. I feel so, I want to say blessed and honored and special to be here today, not only with you, Jaki, but just in this sacred space of NorthStar Church of the Arts, to be here with you all who made a point to come out here on the 4th of July. And I'm just really reflecting and basking in that moment. And so before I get right into questions, Jaki, I want to give you space to say anything that you might want to offer.
Thank you. So it's a blessing to look out and see your wonderful young faces and realize that I'm always the elder in the room these days. But you know what? I receive that. And blessed to be seen in the space and not talked about in the space, right? So it's truly an honor to always sit in conversation across generations and think about the generational wealth that you bring to the table and that elders have bestowed upon me, and the responsibility of being a vessel to allow that to pass through me, as you are being vessels to those who are coming after you. So it's really a blessing, and thank you so much for the invitation. I actually delivered the first, I think they called it a sermon, which scared the crap out of me, but I was the first officiant in this space when NorthStar opened officially. And it's always good to be back inside of this sacred space. And it is a sacred space. You can be still, you can understand and feel the sacredness of it. So thank you.
Yes. So today's theme, the theme of this event is Black autonomy. And so I want to start by just defining what that means. So, Jaki, what does that word autonomy and then adding that piece Black autonomy mean to you?
Well, autonomy has always been a very empowering concept for artists, but it's also constitutive of a very false idealism of art. So for me, I've always understood that I have and will execute freedom to write whatever I please. And not only that, but making the decision in whose service that I decide to participate. You know, just because we're called doesn't mean we got to go. Autonomy also for me has privileged my artworks as self-contained objects of aesthetic contemplation and universal appeal, not as cultural artifacts implicated in social and historical complexity, which really translates and means for me, what does emancipation mean for me as a Black woman writer, an elder who is not ascribing and who has never ascribed to any systems that would define and critique my creativity, my knowledge, my education, inside of frameworks that really don't support me or engage my definition of what literary citizenship means. So I'm mindfully inside of practices that require me to ask of myself, what does literary citizenship mean? And how does my public participation continue to require things of me? And what are those requirements? What am I required to offer as writer, as historian, as researcher, as activist, and agitator? How am I curating my work and opportunities that serve the communities that I thrive in? Those are the questions I ask myself in the lens of autonomy. How does my poetry transform into urgent, necessary, and potent medicine? How does my creativity become a table, a bowl, a bed, sanctuary? Meaning, what is the purpose of the book I just wrote? What is the everydayness, ordinariness, power of the art of that book? What is it a utility for a book of poems that I create? And how do I show up every day inside of the ordinariness and everydayness of art? Meaning removing art from this very lofty Eurocentric plateau, right, of something that's inaccessible. What is the museum of the ordinary? We don't have to go to the museum. We're all human museums. So that's been my embrace my entire creative life, and thinking about the self-reliance inside of creativity and defining ourselves without permission.
I love it. I'm taking notes so I can come back to things, and a few things that jumped out to me are generational wealth, the wealth and the knowledge that we as young people and you as an elder, we both carry, the things that we owe each other, not only as citizens, but as creative citizens. I heard art as a table for offerings. If I'm giving you this piece of art, what are you to take from it? And then I'm also hearing, just because we're called does not mean we need to go. And that really ties to refusal. How do we say no? And I think that's kind of hard, especially for people who feel like we can or are supposed to do it all. Just what does refusal look like for you? How do you navigate that?
Well, first of all, so I think I misunderstood the question because I thought refusal coming from the other way.
Okay, I'm open to it.
Right, so I kind of responded. So I'm that little girl that played school a lot. So I write out everything. So I don't repeat myself over and over again, and I sound like I know what I'm talking about. So I am referring to a lot of notes.
That's fine. Look,
because I took these questions very seriously. But yeah, that whole notion of refusal, when I think about, to be refused means that you asked for something in the first place. I never asked for none. Okay? I accept, I receive. But understanding that we have the power to control what these containers of refusal look like. We have more power than we realize that we have. So this goes back to a ton of questions that I had prepared for the audience, because I want to think about, as a child growing up, I saw art all around me. Yes, I went to museums, but I really understood art from a very sincere place of practicality inside of a community that raised me. I come from a family of potters, of Orange County potters, who were not formal trained potters, but people went to the red clay banks of the creeks of Orange County for red clay to make a pot, not for the aesthetic of ceramics, but because somebody needed a pot to go to the creek to bring the water back. Somebody made those beautiful wooden dough bowls, not for the aesthetic that they were going to become vintage collected pieces, but because somebody needed a bowl to make the bread in. My grandmother and all the women in my community were quilters, amazing quilters. They were not making quilts for the aesthetic of quilting or knowing that years from now their quilts could sell for $7,000 a pop or more. They made quilts because someone needed to stay warm. They made quilts for the family. And as a child growing up, I always wondered where my little brother's pajamas and my pajamas disappeared to when they became too little. Well, every Christmas, everybody received, my brother and I and the cousins, we all got our pajama quilt. They were made from all of those, too little pajamas. Although the girls in my family received a wedding quilt. Those quilts were made from the discarded wedding dresses, prom dresses, cotillion dresses, all the party dresses from my mom and her two sisters. So there was lots of brocade and satin and silk and organza, But the stories inside of those quilts. It's fascinating when my mother and her sisters would say, oh, that's that ugly pea green dress, those dresses we had to wear to cousin so-and-so's wedding reception. I hated those dresses. Every little patch had a story. So I learned that, art is a living thing. That is not something that's collected and put away and that you can't touch. But it should be something that breathes and we touch every day in our homes. And that's why I talk about the everydayness, the ordinariness of art. Like what's inside of your human museum. I also believe that what we keep keeps us. That what we keep keeps us. Think about the artifacts, the things that we keep. The recipes, the cookbooks, the memories, the stories, the sayings, right, from the old folk. The practices that belong to your family, to your heirloom. So I think a lot about, heirlooms when I think about this whole notion of refusal. But I guess I should jump into some of those questions so I can answer this question. So I have a lot of questions, and this goes back to the question of how to stay rooted in your visibility, which is kind of about refusal. When your visibility is no longer tied to resources. And I think we're talking about monetary resources in this conversation. So I answer this question with a lot of questions, because the questions that I'm going to ask you have been my guides. These questions have been my guides for my creative life, for doing the work I do. And I'd like to invite you to think about how you think about these questions. So these questions for me have reshaped how I define freedom, how I've learned to let go of excess and clutter, not just material excess, but excess in human form as well. How I live in harmony and how I strive to be a better being inside of harmony with the natural world, detached from societal expectations of material wealth. A lot of times when we talk about generational wealth, a lot of us are talking about money solely. And we're not talking about the wealth that's not measurable in dollar signs, but the wealth that's passed down to us. I've ridded my spirit of empty desires with these questions, and I've steeped myself in self-sufficiency, fearless honesty, and the knowledge of how to stay rooted in my work when the visibility is not being funded. I believe that inspiration, interrogation, and self-reflection are not anchored in measurements that have to do with having access to monetary resources. I just don't believe that. You can't make me believe it. But these are the questions I have for us to think about. What does it mean to be a living ceremony? What does it mean to be a living ceremony? How do we create light for the voices in history that's tied to silence through art, music, storytelling, and celebration? What does it mean to be inspired, present, and remembered? What does it mean to be forgotten? What does it mean to be discarded? When will we truly understand that racial reckoning wouldn't last long, wasn't gonna last long? Because American attention span to injustice is always fleeting, and it's always been anchored in convenience. Have we forgotten that safe havens that we aren't creating can also be cages? Have we forgotten that people beckoning us to their definitions of safety might be a cage? What is our genetic memory of remembering and forgetting? And what do we need to remember to forget? Or how do we need to remember to remember? And what do we absolutely need to remember to not remember? A lot of memory. But y'all talk about ancestral memory all the time. But what is it that we need to remember not to remember? The things that have been told about us. Who are we when white people aren't looking? I actually wrote, who are we when white people ain't looking? Who are we when we aren't performing? Who are we when we aren't conforming or translating? Who are we when we no longer are bound by the gaze, the threats, or the rewards that whiteness offers? What does the land help you remember? How do we awaken our blood memory, our primal memory that reminds us that we're all connected to the earth, the smell of the soil, the minerals, the plants? What memory is evoked in our blood memory? How do we start honoring our earth differently? When will we press a seed into the soil? When will we understand the lessons inside the harvests that become whispered poems of kinship? You work with the earth, then you know something about your kinship to the earth. What are the questions that haunt us, but also liberate us? What is fearless honesty inside of your creativity? Do we eat to nourish, or do we eat to escape? Do we buy because we need or because we're bored? How do we keep speaking, and how do we preserve history in rhythms that are older than America itself? How do we shapeshift into the vessels, the voices, and the guardians that are needed right now for the protection of our communities? What does it mean to belong? What does it mean to belong? And how do we harness the power of the grandmother's understanding? How do we harness the power of the grandmother's understanding that written record cannot replace the voice of a grandmother? And we have become so technicalized, that ain't a word. We've become so technological, right? And educated inside of these little boxes that we have forgotten the sheer transference of what it means to be human. Not a humanity that's kind of spinning through podcasts, right? And influencers, but the grandmothers who occupy the four corners of the universe, the grandmothers who predicted this very day, this very season of uncertainty, this season of attack on our humanity, this season of eradicating us. The grandmothers predicted it. And now they're saying, told you so. So that's kind of my long answer, is answering with these questions, because these are the questions that guide me, that have helped me stand inside of thinking about this notion of refusal. And let's keep talking about that. I know you want to.
Yeah. There's so many places we could go with that, because another thing I'm thinking about that I think would really create some more roots for this conversation is, I loved your question of what does it really mean to belong? Because there's so much conversation about, let's build community. I'm in community. I'm trying to build a community. And so it doesn't always have the depth that community really needs. And I think for a lot of us younger folks, we're still trying to decipher and understand what true community looks like, even in a landscape where it's been distorted. So I'm going to tie this back to some of the questions that we've got listed, but I'm curious to you, like, what does it look like to belong? And then I want to talk about how we use that to build and protect our community.
So I reflect a lot on growing up in the 60s and 70s, growing up, being born in the 50s, growing up during segregation, attending public schools that were segregated until I went to the 9th grade. Growing up in a community that, there were just all of these unspoken allegiances that no one went hungry, that no one would ever be homeless. If someone died in the neighborhood or in your family, those children did not go into foster care. Those children did not go away. They stayed in the family. If someone lost their house to a fire, well, you figured out a way to double up in your house and bring everybody into your house. So sometimes there might be 12 people in a house. And I'm reminded when the Hamlet fire, and this is before a lot of you, how many people know about the Hamlet fire in Hamlet, North Carolina? So the Imperial Chicken Factory employed people, very poor black and white people, to actually, pick and clean chickens on an assembly line and prepare them, to go out to grocery stores. There was a fire that happened in one of the boiler rooms. The company had a policy of locking the doors to the Imperial Chicken Imperial Chicken plant, so the workers would not go over their lunchtime. On this particular day, the doors were locked when the fire happened. And all these people lost their lives. 25 people died. I later found out I knew all 25 people because I worked for legal services, and at that time, all 25 people were clients of ours. I became obsessed with those deaths. I became obsessed with their death certificates. And I have a long poem about this. But I'm telling this story because there were grandmothers who suddenly had to make room for 6 grandchildren in a 2-bedroom house. We do what we have to do. Grandmothers who would not wait. I worked on the case of trying to get, a really decent settlement with attorneys. Grandmas were like, look, baby, this $2,500 they want to give me right now, I need it right now. I got to buy some beds. These youngins need some new clothes to go back to school. I can't wait $10 to maybe get $1 million. 10 years. Mm-hmm. I can't wait. So we have always been a people that knows how to create, knows how to improvise, knows how to, the old saying, make a little something out of a little nothing.
Yes.
We can take a little something, make something out of it. And that's what we know to do. So, what was the question again?
So now that we have this example of what it looks like to be in community, what are some other ways that today we can actively protect each other in a community? So
that's what I was getting at by giving this illustration of how communities come together. During COVID, there was a lot of urgency, and we were all opened up. Our hearts were opened up to move forward and make space for each other and to help each other. And we've kind of pulled back. So we have the models for what community looks like. You know, and even folk you don't like. We're in a time where, like the Mean Black Girl Club, like, y'all need to give up y'all membership if y'all in it or y'all know some folk in it, right? All the clubs, all these little pockets, right, that prevent us from like really seeing what's real. And what's real is we're all in this boat together. Doesn't matter whether our ancestors came through the Middle Passage or they came through Ellis Island, right? Or landed in Plymouth, came on the Mayflower. We're all in the same boat now. So community for me has always looked like what it looked like when I was a child. And that's the model that I have used. You know, understanding that there is always going to be enough. And to break it down in terms of right now here, we throw away more food, all of us, in a week, right? We throw away enough food that could feed an entire family for another week, right? We have clothes that we haven't worn yet, ain't gonna wear, right? So we have these things. And that's one of my faults I've had with like Christian-centric teachings about, dear God, please feed the poor. Dear God, please clothe. Why are you asking my God to do this ridiculous stuff? When you have already blessed me with the blessing to go bless them, but I got the food. Mm-hmm. Bring the people in your house. What does that look like? What does your practice look like? You know, so I started this project many years ago, and I do it more honestly in Morocco now than here, but it's called The Table. It's called The Table. It's inviting people to your table that you generally would not invite. It's inviting the folk that you don't talk to on your street to your table. Finding out who we are. I live in a neighborhood, I think there are 13 houses on my street, and I only know by name one family. Mm-hmm. Folk don't talk to each other. That's very foreign to me growing up, where everybody knew everybody, so this whole notion of latchkey kids didn't exist. There were eyes on you that you didn't even know were on you constantly. That's what community looks like. I am my brothers and sisters' keeper. It looks like making your business my business if it means it's a matter of survival. Because see, we are too quick to stand back and say, you know, I'm so sorry she got hit by the bus. You know, and I could have told her it was the bus. But it wasn't my business to tell her it was a bus hitting her. That's kind of the mindset that we operate, that we've been conditioned with now, right? It's only our business when it's convenient. And right now, the matter of survival has to be a necessary inconvenience to all of us. It's an inconvenience to think about survival, right? But it's so necessary right now. I can't survive if you don't survive. That's what community looks like. It's not the picking and choosing. It's not being the gatekeeper. It's not deciding who's cool enough, who black enough, who political enough. What about who's human enough? And that's all of us.
Yeah, I have been doing some research just about you, getting more familiar with your materials, and you shared a story in, I believe it was a video by North Carolina Arts, where you said that your uncle would bring bushels of corn to folks who had low crops, and folks would do the same for your family, black, white, whatever it was. And so even at that time, it would cross race lines and whatever other divisions you had to make sure that we in this community were all surviving. And I'm sure your uncle knew those people's names, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have vivid memories of white men showing up at my uncle's house, my aunt and uncle's house, with a truckload of whatever, and saying, Irvin, I heard your corn didn't come in. I bought you a couple bushels of corn, but you got to give me some tomatoes because my tomatoes didn't come in. Or in my community, black men slaughtered their pigs around October. White folk did it in September. All the black men went and helped all the white men slaughter their pigs. Then all the white men came and helped all the black men slaughter their pigs. On Christmas morning, we knew that little at the back door. We got happy because that was the white man, the black man, the many black men, and several white men who went from house to house distributing the pork. They didn't just keep it for their family. They bought you sides, right? Sides of the pig. They bought you everything. Sausage, bacon, all the parts, pork chop. And that food was a real remedy for a lot of poor families. For a lot. They ate that meat all year. Women canned. They shared the canning. So there was never a semblance of lack or not enough. Never. It's kind of like you hear all the time people saying, well, we didn't know we were poor till somebody told us we were poor. None of us knew we were poor. We had everything we needed and most of what we wanted. But that's what that looked like, that crossing these boundaries in the name of survival. And it continues to be that way on a smaller micro scale, but it's not the same. I'm all for bringing that back. I remember, I'm a Southerner, so I grew up, I know the rural South, I know the codes, the traditions. And I remember going to a sister's house because I saw a wreath on her door in my neighborhood. Never been to her house, knocked on the door. I baked a cake, I took the cake, and she was like, why are you bringing me a cake? I'm like, girl, you know how we do? You're supposed to bring food to the house when somebody died. We don't do those traditions anymore. We have been so successful, right? Success requires a dryer now. Get rid of the clothesline, lest it embarrass us, right? Success. These false measurements of how far we've come, right, inside of community.
Yeah, what I heard with that last piece is sacrificing traditions in favor of, I want to say, a certain look, a persona, in order to assimilate with something else. And my question about that is, I know that your poetry style is tied to documentary poetry. And my understanding is that means you document what you see, your life, the stories that are around you. Can you just talk more about that style and why it's important to document these stories?
Sure, I should ask one of my students in the back, one of my former students, to talk about documentary poetry.
Yes.
Two of my former students to talk about documentary poetry. Documentary poetry is a form of poetry that uses primary and secondary sources to retell a historical or personal event. Okay? So primary sources can be all kinds of documents. A driver's license is a primary source. Birth certificate, death certificate, immigration papers, adoption papers, divorce papers, the deed to your house, or the lease to your car, any kind of document, a recipe. It's also those little notes that I like to gather the notes that people leave in their grocery carts, because they tell a lot about the person who left them there. You can tell a lot about somebody's grocery list or somebody's to-do list, right?
So be careful leaving your grocery list around.
So That's another primary source, right? Photographs, diaries, even oral stories can become primary sources. So it was not until I started teaching documentary poetry that I kind of realized that's what I've been doing all my life as a writer, is I'm a documentary poet. But I have been writing through this lens of historical record, of what we keep keeps us. You know, the artifacts in your house, when I say we're all human museums, if I ask you to close your eyes and think about the first room you enter when you walk into your home and what's in that room. Or the first room, the first kitchen you can remember. Think about the first kitchen you can remember as a child. The very first kitchen.
Can we
What's
actually,
in that room?
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can we actually do that? So if you all take a moment, close your eyes if you're comfortable, and picture the first kitchen you imagine.
First kitchen. What's on the walls? What does the furniture look like? What are the color of the curtains? Who's there? Who's not there? What stories are the walls holding? What are your secrets about that kitchen? So all of these primary sources that we don't think about, or if I just said, everybody in the room just like randomly just start shouting out, what is something that you keep? Just don't overthink it. Something that, music, comic books, photos, anybody? Writing, airplane tickets, postcards, video games, letters, Legos, concert tickets. All of these are primary sources, right? Because if I ask you to now write a story in the voice of the airline tickets, wouldn't that be cool? Have the photographs write about you. We are all human museums holding all of these rich stories, right? And it's not just about writing, because writing is not the only art form, but all of these stories that are just waiting to be sung, danced, right? Written, however you want to express them. So that's what I do as a documentarian, is rewrite kind of these historical and personal accounts through a lens of what document might be informing me, what source. So for me, it's always photography, a lot of found pictures in my family, a lot of found documents. I recently was given a copy of the bill of sales of my great-grandfather.
Wow.
It was purchased for $700. So artifacts, right? All of this archival material that we're holding on to. So I know, like, y'all are all into being minimalist. Good, some of you aren't. I'm trying to be a little better because I'm a real maximalist.
I feel that. I'm with you.
But you know, when you find like that letter that was written in 1936, or you find a document that talks about somebody in your family being adopted, and you go like, wait a minute, right? Or you find, oh, that wasn't really your daddy, right? New information that informs a part of your human museum. So how do we capture all of these things that we're keeping? You know, it's not enough to just keep grandma's teapot because it was grandma's, but what are your questions for the teapot? Because that teapot is holding story. Those airline tickets are holding stories. The Legos are holding stories. All of these things are holding a part of your mythology, a part of your anthropology, and you, the artist, have the power to excavate and tell.
That's so powerful. Can you talk about how you how that shows up in your poetry and what some of those examples are that you've used?
Well, I can go back to the Hamlet fire. Because of my relationship, because I worked for Legal Services of North Carolina, I was able to convince the fire marshal to allow me to go into the Imperial Chicken plant 2 days after the fire. It was still there was still a lot of smoke, and it was dangerous. But the researcher, the documentarian, the historian in me needed, and the poet in me needed to witness. It wasn't about my work for legal services. It was about witnessing a certain kind of abolishment of humanity, to lock people inside of rooms that they could not escape during a fire. I needed to bear witness to that. So witness has always been a very potent drive for my writing. Witness. So that's an example. My eldest daughter died in 2009 at the age of 38 from cancer. I wanted to write about her. I couldn't. It wasn't until 2017 that I was able to bear witness to her journals that she had kept during her journey with cancer. And I'd also kept a journal and realized that our two journals were pretty much in conversation. They were kind of like a call and response. They were doing a dance with each other. I'd never seen her journal until 2017. I mean, I knew she kept it, but it literally fell on my foot when I was looking for a book on a bookshelf, and I'm like, what is this? And it was her journal. And I pulled out my journal. So those two journals became primary sources for the writing of a book that I wrote, I Want to Undie You, which I wrote for Imani, which I wrote for my daughter. So that's how I've used life experiences, because life experiences always inform a writer or an artist's body of work, even when it's not conscious. It's always personal.
Yeah, it's always personal. This is switching gears a little bit, but you talking about the Hamlet fires just takes me back to this theme of institutional abandonment. And I just feel like that is such a spot-on example. A institution that has hired people to do a job, and it's implied that when you do a job, you will be protected while you're doing this work. That's what institutional abandonment kind of means or sounds like to me. And so my question is, where have you seen patterns in institutional abandonment from the past, whether it be like the 60s and 70s, from your childhood to today, or where do you see them like splitting up and breaking away? Are there surprises in the news today, or have you seen it all before?
No. I mean, we can start with inequitable education, educational institutions. We can start there. We can talk about medical apartheid. We can talk about everything that's happening right now. I remember the day seeing Lyndon Baines Johnson sign the Civil Rights Act. And I remember, even though I was a child, I knew what it meant for me as a little brown girl of the South. I knew what that meant. So to see the abandonment of all of these struggles and movements that my parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and people in my community, that they literally fought for, because it was a very dangerous time to speak out, the power of utterance. So for me, it's just a return. I mean, I went to segregated schools. I not knew if they'd segregate them again. Except, I think that's a fertile, rich opportunity. The best education that I have received in my life, and that trumps my graduate school and college and my experience at a private Quaker boarding school, was going to segregated school 1st through 8th grades. I am who I am because of that education, not because of my graduate work, okay? Not because of professionalism and academia that has groomed me to be a certain way. It is because of attending a segregated 1st through 8th grade school, knowing that I was loved unconditionally by Black teachers. They were the original No Child Left Behind. You know, all us little brainy smarty pants, we were the ones sent with some paper over here to work, while the teacher went over here and worked with the 4 slow, we call folks slow back then, with the 4 slow children, because they were determined to catch them up, right? So those of us that were learning, right, and functioning and moving fast, they knew that we didn't need as much help. Same school, a few years later, in the early 80s, I am there as a, a substitute teacher. And there were these children in the back. And I said to the class, well, why are those 4 kids in the back? What are they doing? Why aren't they sitting up here reviewing? I'm like, oh, don't bother them. They don't learn. They got some problems. Oh. And the teacher just gives them something to play with. Just give them some blocks or puzzle. Give them, they like pictures. Give them some books with some pictures. They'd be okay. That's what the teacher do while she teach us. So it had reversed. School now is integrated. It was just a reverse. Us little smarty pants, we were over there playing. Because those teachers were determined that those children who needed the most would get the most from them. So that inequity, I mean, I've seen that up front and close. Mm-hmm. And just the difference of raising my own children in the same school system, and my own children going to the same school that I went to as a child. But the value of how do we right now, what are the decisions that we need to make to think about how these revisitations do not overwhelm us? We're going to revisit a lot of it. Doesn't mean that we won't survive it. I survived it. I survived it. Many people have survived it. My mom died at the age of 106 in 2022. Still pretty much in her mind. Smoked every day till the day she died. Her doctor's sitting in here now. Smoked every day right up till she died. But when Trump was elected the first time, my mother's response to a friend of mine who was literally losing her shit on my couch. She's like, Miriam, she's like, baby girl. She's like, I've slain bigger, badder, little ugly dragons than this. This too shall pass.
Amen.
And I have to believe that, and I know that we have what it takes to be what we need to be in this time. But I don't think the urgency, I don't think people are feeling the urgency yet. I don't think, because it hasn't hit you slap up in the face, maybe we don't believe it's really happening to us. Or maybe it ain't nothing real bad happened to nobody we know. But it goes back to if it's happening to one of us, it's happening to all of us. So, yeah, there are many institutional, this collapse of allegiances to humanity, that are paralleling things that I witnessed. The return, and it's never disappeared, but this resurgence of white supremacy, this resurgence of like little devils now popping up and saying, "I'm back," in broad open daylight. The Klan came at night most of the time. And not just that level of supremacy, but the high-tech supremacy that we don't even think about when we're on our computers. The high-tech supremacy, the high-tech oppression. I was having a conversation with very educated folk who both graduated from Duke, and he's an attorney, and they were telling me how they were preparing for what's coming because they have a private group online that's by invitation only, and they're making all these plans. And I was like, so you're putting your plans on the internet? Your escape plan is on the internet.
It's very private.
We don't own the internet. We don't own the internet. Flash, flash, flash. It ain't ours. Before the computers, the civil rights movement, there was no email, there was no text, and yet we knew what was happening. People got the word to where it needed to be. Mm-hmm. There was a different kind of mobilization, right? And it was a huge mobilization. We didn't have any of the high-tech things that we have. So I think that we have to start thinking about how we gonna be in the absence of the things that we have become dependent on. That our communication mode cannot be totally reliant on technology. Yes, it matters and it's important. It cannot be the only thing we rely on.
Thank you so much. I will actually take that as a closing statement. For now, for this portion, that cannot be the only thing that we rely on. How do we build a relationship with community in person, with the folks around us, with our neighbors? And how do we make a plan in real time, right? I think about Octavia Butler, Parable of the Sower. The main character, Lauren, has a go bag, right? Where she can pick up and go if anything happens. I remember in second grade being trained on, if you have a fire in your house, make sure you have an escape route through the window and through the stairs. And if you got an elevator, don't take it, right? Like, you have to have different methods to make sure you're safe. And so now I'd like to open it up to the audience for any questions. Did anything stand out to you all? What would you like to hear more about? We talked about generational wealth, the idealism of art as function. We talked about community, autonomy. Anything standing out to you all? Or just comments, anything you'd want to add to the conversation? Yes?
Well, first, thank you for being here. It's been an awesome experience. So I started writing, I've been writing since I was a kid and just published a book and about to do another one. So when you mentioned like your lived experience informs your writing, my question though is how do you, being a veteran and all that good stuff and having seen war, my novel is like a fantasy, but there's a lot of huge war components, the depravity, the sadness, the loss, all those things that I've personally experienced. But for certain other things kind of underneath the surface, how do you bring your authentic self to that writing when, yes, your lived experience informs it, but you're still kind of afraid to kind of put it all out there? Because that's what I've struggled with, and I still kind of do.
Yeah, and if we tell the truth, we all struggle with that. There's writing that I made a pact with myself that I would not write until all the elders in my family were gone. There were certain things I would not tell until they weren't around to hear me tell it. Okay? Because like, maybe I'm grown enough now, right? At 72, with all of them grown, like maybe I'm grown enough now to tell it. But that angst that we have, about being a truth teller, is really the fuel that you need. And the more you sit with that angst, and the more you allow it to bother you, right? It's going to inform your writing in another way. Like I hear writers sometimes say, I wrote this book with my blood. I've heard writers say this. This book I wrote with my blood. Like I'm all, like I bled. The ink is my blood. So there's a thin line between becoming sacrificial and doing the art. And I'm always saying, are you doing the art or is the art doing you? And that goes back to when people tell me, oh, I have writer's block. I don't believe in writer's block. I believe in the power of the pause. The power of the pause. I don't believe in writer's block. But I say that because when people talk about the muse, I remind people, that girl she don't run you, she worked for you. Right, people talk about, I'm waiting for my muse. Well, you wait on. I got her trained. Come here. Come on over here. And how do we do that? We do that through discipline. We do that through research. So that distance, to answer to your question sometimes, is what is the research you might need to do so you make yourself not primary teller, right? So it's hard when we're holding certain material, right? Certain truth material. It's hard. But sometimes we have to step aside and hand it over to another orator. So we become a multiplicity of voices when telling this story. We're still true. We're still being authentic, right? But I might be telling it through the lens of a bullet and not me. So the bullet might be telling it. The red cap on the ground might be telling it. So there are many techniques, writing techniques, devices to utilize to rethink how we protect ourselves. How we protect ourselves. And also this notion of artists who will emotionally and spiritually bankrupt ourselves in the name of the piece of art, which is also very dangerous. It's like playing Russian roulette. Does that answer any?
It does, thank you. It gives me a lot more to think about too, given everything that he knows. He's been there as a sounding board, and it's a lot trying to communicate everything, whether it's the trauma, the depression, anxiety. Writing lawyers haven't been one. It's just shedding a light. Even family members who are proven artists too, who've seen certain things, but also exploring other relationships and telling those in the most authentic, real way. One, to make it relatable, but two, that, wow, Mark really experienced this. And I can see if they know me, especially, and say, I can see little bits of those throughout all the characters. But I want to be true to that, even sometimes when I have an experience, like I'm black, I'm not black like a partner, but I do write several black main characters, and hopefully I did that justice. And those are, of course, I've lived around the culture, I've essentially married into it, all those things, I want to do that justice. But even writing something like Tolerance of Equal Acceptance, said by a black character, he did justice, like I say, how much he did. We make sure that he's biased, so, but I just want to make sure I'm bringing that honesty and that truth and that credibility and relatability to all of it, and not sugarcoating, hiding, obfuscating, none of those things, because I feel like that distracts from the story I'm trying to tell, because there are things like racism, religious zealotry, classism, all those things wrapped in one of this epic, famous story. Not, people don't people typically don't think of those things when they read a story.
Well, one of the things that I will advise you to do is to not censor yourself. To not censor yourself when you're writing, to not worry about getting it right. There are temporary black cards that we can issue you. Yeah. Yeah, your partner says, yeah, he got that. But not being funny, you know, if we were in an academic setting, I'd probably give you some other exercises around what does it look like when your character isn't in trauma? Because sometimes it's the power of writing about trauma begins with writing about joy. And the flip side of the experience that you want to tell. Because it enriches, it's kind of like my belief that you really don't know what joy is unless you know the depths of pain, unless you know the depths of sorrow. You can't know the depths of joy, right? Unless you also have experienced and willing to allow your humanity to experience the full gamut, right, of the human experience, which is both. So a lot of times when we are doing the trauma work, we are so inside of that lens that it becomes the only lens. And we kind of silo the character. So if that makes sense. So just thinking about how you give fullness to the humanity of the character. And that kind of will balance out, if this is making sense at all, will balance out, I think, some of the angst that you're feeling.
Hi, my name is Trin. I thank you so much for what you shared. It gave me a lot to think about in my own writing practice, and on the topic of like remembering and remembrance. I think a lot about my own family and their relationship to memory. My mom grew up in like the sticks of Virginia, like Williamsburg, near Virginia Beach, and she has, both my mom and grandma have a lot of like racial trauma, like from the Klan, from like being beat up at school by white classmates, things like that. When I try to talk to them about these things, I try to it's like wisdom that I'm trying to access, but the memory is like so painful that they don't want to talk about it. They often like make jokes about it. It's just like I feel like there's just like a disconnect between like the memory and like what we can take from that memory. And I think when I think about my own writing practice, I'm trying to, like I said, access this kind of ancestral wisdom, but I'm struggling with like their own pain of remembrance, like what is the implications for me? And so I was curious for you to speak to that, of like how do you balance that as someone that is like a historian of your own life and legacy and like your family's legacy? Like how do you balance the value of remembrance, but also like the pain that comes with it?
Yeah, that's kind of why I made the comment I made about there are things I will write about now that everybody is gone. Because I had to do the research because of their unwillingness at times to talk about certain things. I had to do the research that involved them. You know, you're at an advantage that I didn't have, because when I was doing a lot of research about something else that revolved around a lot of trauma, everybody was gone. Like they're dead. But these folk are still here. You know what I'm saying? So part of this is like, don't talk about the trauma. Just tell them to talk about their lives. You know what I'm saying? And even if they censor what they say to you, or they give you abbreviated versions of it, take what you got and go research and find the other stuff. Ask other family members who are willing to talk about certain things. It's a hard one. It's a hard one to honor what they've been through. You know, there's so much shame attached to the harm that other people inflicted upon us. Like, we didn't self-inflict. But there is so much shame around it, you know, the pain around it. And for many of them, it's protecting us. You don't need to know. That was what you don't need to know. Grown folk business. You don't need to know. That was the answer to a lot of questions. You need to know. But we need to know. We need to know. But, you know, letting them know that you want to know who they are in all of their glory. You know, in all of their heydays. Because when they start getting excited about telling you about the good stuff, they'll tell you about the bad eventually.
And if I can add on to that.
Yeah.
So my work with the Durham Artist Archive really began way before I started interviewing folks about Durham and artists here. A few years ago, I have 7 grandmothers. Some of my grandfathers remarried. I count my great-grandmother's grandmother, my mom's godmother, grandmother. So I just count them all in that number, and I interviewed all of them. And I have it all on recording. And so how I approached those interviews was just asking about their girlhood. And just like you said, we talked about the good mostly, and sometimes they touched on the bad a little bit. A lot of times they stayed away from it, which was fine. But I learned that my dad's mother wanted to be a draftsman. She wanted to be an architect. But women were not architects at that time. You know, I got to learn that my great-grandmother, who's still with us, she just celebrated her 87th birthday. She was in a union. She led her union, and she still attends union meetings, right? Even though she doesn't work. And so, yeah, so I'm like, and I love that for her, right? Like, she is still out here fighting and supporting and doing the good work to make sure that the next generation can get the support that they need and get, like, work equity and all of that. So that's just another way to approach it. Ask about the love and the things that they care about, and more will come out, just as you said. So I just wanted to add more color to that question.
And also, you know, like, use the photographs you have, you know, because there are a lot of stories located there. So you make me think about something around the notion of permissions. So there's this photograph that exists, and this photograph has been in my possession for a long time. It's a photograph of 4 women who are dressed in kind of, it's a sepia-colored old photograph. So these 4 women are looking forward, and they're kind of posing, and they're real sassy, and it looks like they have on, like, pastels, because you can't tell because it's sepia. But there's my mother on the edge of the photograph, like, really, like, on the edge, like she doesn't even belong in the picture. And she's dressed in all black. And these women are kind of in this frolicking posture, and she's dressed in all black, and she has on this, like, little tiny black pillbox with, you know, a veil. And she has on this black wool suit, and it's winter because all the women, like, have on coats. Black wool suit, you know, like, her waist is like this big, with this huge white gardenia, like, you know, on the waist. It's like a little cute little peplum looking outfit. So I asked my mom one day, who are these women and what's the story? Well, she gave me a story. At the time, all the women were alive. I interviewed all of them individually. I got a different story about the picture from all the women. Then I had a luncheon for them at my house. They all came. I interviewed them collectively about the picture. I thought they were going to get into a fist fight. But girl, I'm older than you. I know where we were. Well, I wouldn't have worn black to a wedding. I mean, they were like we were at so-and-so's wedding. And my mom's like, no, because I'm in black. I wouldn't have worn black. We didn't wear black to weddings back then. So I'm like, well, maybe you hooked up with them after the funeral at the club. I mean, none of it made sense. So the questions I had for myself is, what is the truth? What is the truth of the story? I will never know. But what I have to honor is everybody's different truth. I have to honor everybody's version of truth. So I always say, I must tell the truth by which I know the truth as a creative practice. I tell this truth by the way I know it is truth. So I have all of these, this picture has driven me nuts. And it still continues to kind of haunt me because I really want to know. And all the women are frontal, you know, like they're happy and gleeful. And my mom is standing there and like this, she's looking down in this very somber pose where she's looking down with her hands like this at her waist. Yeah, but I love these rabbit holes. I love going down these rabbit holes. So I guess what I want to say is find pictures, ask them about the pictures, capture those stories, because stories beget stories. Stories beget stories. So just keep bugging them.
Yeah.
They might kill you, but it's, you know.
I think I see a hand there. And yes, oh, you got the mic there? No, you had it. Oh, okay. Oh, all right.
Something that caught me, you were talking about how when the pandemic hit in 2020, our hearts were more open. And I am very lucky to have been raised by Miss Mary, who has been the staple of community, who lives with her door open. People can always come in, get a plate. And she is the daughter, and I am the great-granddaughter of Lily May, who in Germantown put on rent parties. And so I've been raised with this idea of community that for me, I've always been in search of, right? And I do feel like there are these moments, like during the start of the pandemic, or the uprisings, or even recently when Helene hit my hometown, Asheville, that in these moments of crisis, community reveals itself in these very beautiful ways. And I'm just curious, like, what you take from that, because it's been really hard to uncomplicate it. Like, why does it have to get so hard? Almost for it to get so easy. You know what I'm saying? For people to actually talk to their neighbors, to feed and clothe their neighbors, to get to know their neighbors. Like, what lessons can we take from that? And what does it call into question? That it takes these moments of rupture for community to really reveal itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I started talking about the table project that we have of inviting people, I've been doing this for years. So I guess what I want to say is when you're in communion with folk all the time, in and out of bad and good seasons, that's what remains steady are the relationships. So this is about relationship building. You know, like a lot of us do a lot of work as social and cultural activists, but a lot of us never develop relationships inside of that work. We just do the work. So I ask my students and ask my people that I work with, writers, what is your relationship to your creativity? Well, what is your relationship to your community? You know what I mean? It's like during the civil rights movement, as a child of the 60s and 70s and coming of age in the 70s, it was necessary to get drunk after spending all day protesting.
It was necessary to hit a whole bunch of juke joints. It was necessary to have the fish fry in the backyard. It was necessary to go to the cookout. Because what I've learned from slow, that, when I talk about the power of the pause, what's inside of that pause that we are not addressing? Like, we need each other more than when there's a crisis. We need each other there are times like, oh, this wonderful thing just happened to me. I don't know a damn person I can call and celebrate with. Right? I need you not just when my daughter dies. I need you when I just want to laugh. So I think that this culture has taught us to be human doers and not human beings. We're so busy doing and occupying all of our time that the power of the pause, this slow, like now we talk about slow cooking and slow living, like the slow movement. It's real. We need to slow it down. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I'm kind of talking around your question is I think that we need to really start practicing how to be in community with people all the time. We have the model we have many models, but my model is the civil rights movement because that's what I was raised in. And that's the model I have of slow purpose pauses. We picked it right back up on Sunday because Sunday night was coming back together to filibust and organize again to get ready to go back out for a week of work. But those pauses that we have to give to each other, like, where is the joy that we cultivate as a community? We talk about community gardens and all of this stuff, but again, we're doing stuff. You know what I mean? But where is the spirit? And we have the institutional formats to help us carry this work out. Right? A lot of them. And I guess the one I'm thinking about is community faith-based organizations. If they were doing what they should be doing. Around community. Around holding people. And then something we've not talked about in this whole conversation is the spirit of accountability. How are we holding ourselves accountable for how we show up, right? And because it starts with me. How do I hold myself accountable? Like, yeah, I'm going to go knock on this door. I know these people had a Trump sign there last year, but I'm going to knock. I saw your little boy in the street. I don't think he should be in the street. I gave him some cookies. Was that okay? How do we still be our neighbors against the odds? And I can talk this because I am the one that was crazy enough I used to follow the Klan. I used to actually physically follow wherever they were going to be near me. And I did this for many, many years in the name of witness. Until there were these white guys that showed up every time. I knew that they were FBI undercover. I knew who they were. You can spot, if you know what they look like, you can spot them a mile away. FBI undercover. I knew who they were. One day this guy came to me. He followed me to the grocery store. I left the Klan march, went to the grocery store. He followed me, he and another man, and he said, Ms. Shelton Green, we need to talk to you. We're FBI. I said, I know who you are. He said, you've got to stop doing this. He said, we totally get it. We understand your need to bear witness. But we can't do our job because when you show up, our focus becomes protecting you. We can't do what we're here to do as infiltrators of this march. We need you to not do this anymore so we can do our job. But what I learned from those Klan marches was the power of humanity. There would be women who could not take their eyes off of me. Women, Klanswomen.
Because the little children and I would play games. I would sit under a tree with my journal, and some little white girl in her little mini Klan outfit would be throwing me kisses. And I'd be throwing kisses back at her. Or they would sneak and look around and I'd wave back at them. The mothers pretended that it wasn't happening. The mothers witnessed it. They pretended that it wasn't happening. So in that moment, I knew you might be a Klanswoman, but there's something else going on here. Because you have granted me permission to do this with your child. Because you had the power, right, to single me out and tell me, stop playing with my child.
Did that ever happen?
No, never happened. How do we cross these imaginary and real boundaries, right? What are we willing to sacrifice, right, in the name of community building? What are we willing to sacrifice? And that may not be the story to answer that, but the community is always here. Like we all use the word community building. The community has been built. It's here. You know, like we don't need to reconstruct it. We don't need to rebuild it. You know what I'm saying? We need to be better stewards of it, and we need to protect it better and show up differently. But the community is here, and we know it's here. We see evidence of it, like you were saying, in these times of crisis. But what does it look like? I've also seen it in times of joy too. But we need to do that more. And we need to do that, though, not as a gatekeeper who decides who can come play and who can't come play. Because we do that too. We do that too. As arts practitioners, some of us decide what bands can come and what bands can't come, and what writers can come and what writers can't come. We do that too. How are we making spaces? Does that make sense? Or answer your question in any way? And knowing you will say no, but, because I know you, but does that get to anything you're talking about?
Yeah, I definitely think it gets there. I'm also curious though, and I guess just like from this experience at home, there's this one Firestorm Anarchist Book Collective in Asheville where there was this notable moment where we were like, I went up to help after like 3 days after the flood, and we were doing distro, and someone like whispered and was like, that's the guy who's been sending us death threats, who had come to help distribute food at the place where all these people like brought resources to, right? And so in these moments of like, I don't know, division or partisanship, in these moments of rupture, you do see those like ways of community. And I guess my question is like, there's these moments of crisis, but when there's not, and we're pausing for joy, how do we have those conversations and let community in who, with that hurt, you know, and with that understanding of like this deeply rooted division that in moments of crisis made thin, the veil is lifted, the divide is a lot less blurry, but in moments when there isn't crisis, people hold really tight to you.
That's an excellent question, because I'm kind of dealing with something like that right now on a board where the former founder of this organization was a predator, and that person is dead now. And as a president of this board, I'm like pulling the Band-Aids off of all the lies. You know, like we have a mission statement that does not really apologize, you know, for what this person has done, or hold, you know, I wasn't a part of the board. None of us on this board, right, were there. But it's the history. And how, as trustees of this, do we move forward without dealing with that history? And for me, the answer to your question, and it's helping me answer this a little bit, is coming back to relationship building again. It's going to start with somebody being bold enough to be the truth teller, right, and hold that person accountable in a public space and say, you came here, we're going to assume this was a goodwill act, however, and deal with the however. I mean, I don't know any other way to deal with truth except exposing truth and being on the side of truth and helping people understand how truth really does free us and how this horrible act could be redeemed. But how do you, I guess the question I have is like, what does a relationship building look like with that person in Asheville with all the players that are involved? So I wanted to end with something. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to end with this, and thank you all for your questions and for your comments and for being patient and for being present and for your validations. But I thought about what I wanted to say to you as younger folk. At the end of the day, this is what I know that I know. Liberation transcends beyond destroying systems that do not serve us. Liberation is about building spaces where we can breathe, make nappy-headed babies, and exist in all of our wholeness. I witnessed my elders during the civil rights movement and realized that their stance on intolerance of injustice was not merely political, it was personal. It was a receipt stamped paid in full for me and you and the ones yet to be born. Because everyone in this room, everyone is our ancestors' wildest dream. My ancestors taught me that joy is how we remind ourselves of what we are willing to sacrifice in a world that profits off of our exhaustion. We must be the joy that our ancestors seeded and continue. We must continue so we can disrupt this mess with our happiness, with our joy and our happiness. We will not be reduced to sufferance. Centering our joy and revolutionary love for each other is how we sustain ourselves. We must and we will refuse inside of our loud joy because survival is not enough. We must dance, shout, shake our bodies all through the night as an unapologetic hallelujah. We must live our lives out loud because political politeness is over. And I am required to remember that I am not here to be a gatekeeper for the Mammy Museum of Magical Negroes. Don't be a magical Negro. We must do the work, and we must do it together. So thank you. Thank you so much for your questions, for your grace, for your beauty.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. If I can just take a note from what you said. This 4th of July, I hope that you all are able to disrupt any of the complex, conflicted, mixed emotions that you may feel about this holiday, about the state of the world, and find some joy, right? Even in the civil rights movement. I did not expect you to say that it was necessary to get drunk at the end of the night. All right, I'm not saying that's what you have to go do, but just find some joy this afternoon and this weekend. So, thank you. Thank you so much.
Deep gratitude for the conversation. Intergenerational conversation should happen more often. Thank you all for being here and bearing witness and being a part of this. I did want to say that I think that a lot of what we're facing is dealing with propaganda. And so what we do at NorthStar pretty often, especially at our Sunday services every month, is try to fight that propaganda with political education. So this Sunday, the 6th, this year we're looking at different artists through history in their historical context and what they fought for. We did Emory Douglas last month. We talked about the Black Panther Party and lessons from their organizing. And I think that's the only way to combat those really hard divides in times of not crisis. So if you want to come out Sunday morning, it's free. It's the first Sunday of every month, and we're talking about Mary McKeeba this month, and we're going to do some collaborative drumming together. We're going to make up some protest songs. So feel free to grab some food on your way out. Again, thank you so much, and thank you so much to our panelists. Another round of applause.